Gladiator fashion.
Gladiator fashion.
Yeah, like what those ancient Roman warriors wore into the arena.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't considered that as a topic before.
Right. It's not the first thing that comes to mind when you think of gladiators. And it turns out there's a whole world of fascinating details about what they wore, both then and now.
Now, you mean gladiator fashion is still a thing today?
Oh, absolutely. But first, I think we need to set the scene a bit. For those who might not be as familiar with gladiatorial combat, can you give us a quick overview of what it was all about?
Sure. Picture the Coliseum, this massive arena in ancient Rome, packed with thousands of spectators. It was a spectacle, a brutal form of entertainment where gladiators, often slaves or prisoners of war, would fight each other, sometimes to the death.
So it was really violent.
Yeah, definitely. But it wasn't just mindless brutality. The gladiators were highly skilled fighters, trained in different styles of combat.
Like what kinds of fighting styles?
Well, some were heavily armored, like the mermo. They were kind of like the tanks of the arena, built for close combat, heavily protected. Then you had lighter, more agile fighters, like the acaras, who relied on a net and trident to try and entangle their opponents from a distance.
Sounds like a dangerous job. So where does the fashion come in? Was it just about protection, or was there more to it?
It was definitely about protection, but there was a whole lot more to it than that. The type of armor and weapons a gladiator wore actually told a story about who they were, their skills, their background, and even their intended fate in the arena.
Like a visual language.
Exactly. It was a powerful form of communication, both for the gladiators themselves and for the audience.
What were some of the key pieces of a gladiator's wardrobe?
Well, as I mentioned, the type of armor varied depending on the gladiator's fighting style. But in general, they would have worn a helmet, of course, often very elaborate and designed to intimidate opponents.
Right, those helmets were pretty iconic with the plumes and crests and all that.
Exactly. And then they would have had various pieces of armor protecting their body, like a breastplate, shoulder guards, shin guards, things like that. The materials used were often leather, bronze, or iron.
And what about weapons?
Weapons also varied depending on the gladiator's fighting style. Swords, daggers, spears, nets, tridents, all sorts of things.
The source material mentioned something about crocodile skin arm guards. That seems like a very specific choice.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting detail. Now, crocodile skin is incredibly tough and durable, so it would have provided excellent protection. But I think the choice of material also probably had a symbolic meaning. Crocodiles were revered in ancient Egypt, and this reverence might have carried over to Rome, associating the crocodile with strength, power, and maybe even a bit of the exotic.
So it was like a status symbol almost.
Could have been. Imagine the impact of a gladiator strutting into the arena wearing something as rare and intimidating as crocodile skin armor.
That's really cool. So we've talked about the then of gladiator fashion, but what about the now? You mentioned earlier that gladiator fashion is still around today. Where do we see that influence?
Oh, it's everywhere. You see it on the runways, in movies, in costumes, even in sports. Think about American football, for example. The padded shoulders they wear, that's a direct descendant of the gladiator's shoulder armor.
And what about those studded leather jackets you see all the time?
Yep, another nod to the gladiator aesthetic. Leather and metal studs, those were key elements of a gladiator's look, and they continue to be popular in fashion today.
So it's not just about copying the ancient designs directly, it's more about capturing that essence, that spirit. Right.
Exactly. It's about reinterpreting those elements for a modern audience. Take the movie Gladiator, for instance. The costumes were inspired by historical designs, but updated with new materials and a more stylized look.
And it's not just movies. I've seen tons of designers like Alexander McQueen and Versace incorporate elements of gladiator attire into their collections, playing with those themes of strength, power, and rebellion.
It's fascinating how those themes continue to resonate with us today.
Absolutely. So why do you think we're still so drawn to gladiator fashion, both then and now?
I think it taps into a deep fascination with courage, resilience, and fighting against the odds. Gladiators were, in a sense, symbols of defiance against a system that was often brutal and unjust. Their attire, both then and now, evokes those ideas and allows us to connect with that same spirit.
That's a really interesting point. It makes you think about these outfits in a whole new light. If you were to design a modern-day gladiator outfit, what would it look like? What elements would you borrow from the past, and how would you make it your own?
Yeah, think about what materials you would use, what kind of armor, what weapons, what kind of statement you would want to make with your design.
To get those creative juices flowing, maybe search for things like Roman gladiator armor, modern gladiator costumes, or even gladiator-inspired fashion.